Welcome back to the Joust About Careers podcast. This is the place to learn about careers from the people who are actually doing the work every day. I'm your host, Brian Bratt, and this week's guest is 2007 Van Buren graduate Katherine Wilkins, who works as a Senior Computational Biologist. In this episode, Katherine shares advice for students looking to attend a highly selective university, how she ended up earning her PhD from Cornell, the positives and challenges of her career, and much more. Whether you are interested in a career as a computational biologist or are still exploring your options, I hope that what Katherine shares today will help all of you make better career decisions and have fulfilling career journeys. Enjoy the show. Thank you very much, Katie, for joining us today. And I'd love to start out by hearing, what does a typical day look like for a senior computational biologist?
Sure, yeah. So I spend most of my day sitting at a computer. And currently I'm actually working remotely since COVID. My
Oh,
job site's in Santa Clara, and I actually live outside of Baltimore. So I'm at my computer most of the day. I do a couple of different things. I really enjoy working with folks internally who are trying to develop new products. I might sit and code something up in Python to make a plot for them so they can better understand their data. Something else I really enjoy is interacting with customers. At this point, I've been at Agilent for about 9 years, and so I'm one of the more senior folks in my group. And so that means that I've had a lot of experience talking to customers, and I really enjoy that. We'll be working with an academic lab who's exploring a really interesting question about genetics, or I worked with a lab in New York State who are getting a FDA approved blood cancer test. So I really enjoy doing things like that feel like I'm practically helping people. And so
mhm.
days where I have customer meetings, get to work on solving problems for them are some of my favorite days.
So a lot of sitting in a computer, but you still get to have that human interaction.
Yeah, that's right.
So when you were in high school, was this something on your radar, or what were your plans when you were graduating from Van Buren?
This was not something I knew existed when I was when I was in high school. I've always really been interested in animals. I got into reading about genetics in maybe middle school, high school. I'm someone who likes logic problems. Like if you're someone who likes doing Sudoku, or if you've had a biology class where you do like Punnett squares, and those are things that you enjoy, or computer programming, this kind of logical problem solving stuff I really enjoy. But I've never well, I guess it was important to me to feel like I was doing something that helped people, even though I was sitting at a computer all day. And because of this interest in animals and biology, I wanted to do computer science and I wanted to do biology. And so I went to undergrad, and I was indecisive and took classes for both as though I was going to major in both. And I did my undergrad at Case Western. And I would say one of the really nice things about that school is that all the professors are doing research. So I almost all of my friends had research experience by the time we graduated. And so how I got into what I'm doing is that there was a really great professor there, Dr. Thomas Laframboise, who kind of took me under his wing and taught me how to program in R and got me started on a research project of my own during undergrad.
Very interesting. Now, I will state for the record, I never understood Punnett squares when I was in high school. So it's a good thing I
They're not
am
for
not.
everyone.
Yeah, they were not for me. Um, but, again, I think that just shows that there are careers that really fit people well. And this is a career that fits you well because of those interests and skills and aptitudes and all of that. Now, you talked a little bit about going to Case Western Reserve, obviously a well-known university and a fairly um, highly ranked university. What advice would you give to students who are considering going to a Case Western or one of those other highly ranked universities that are highly selective?
Yeah, I mean, obviously your grades are going to matter. Um, I really like the Princeton review books for studying for standardized tests. I found those super helpful for doing well, like the ACT and the SAT. Um, if you can find people who've been to those schools, like for instance, I'm happy to read people's, essays or help with applications. Um, Something that I found, I was fortunate to go to graduate school. Well, I started at Iowa State, but I finished at Cornell. And one of the big differences I noticed between Iowa State and somewhere as highly ranked as Cornell is that there were a lot more people who had gone ahead of me in it getting certain awards and things like that who I could get advice from. And that was super valuable. So certainly if you know people who've been to those universities, it's great to talk to them. Um, and then just apply to a bunch of them. Like I mean, I got rejected by MIT, right? You're not going to get in everywhere. My mom made me apply to some schools that were backup schools as well, and I think that's a good plan. I don't I don't hire people. I help in the hiring process, and I don't base it on where people went to school. So it's important, but it's not everything.
Right. So I hadn't really planned to talk about that, but in that hiring process, if it's not the school, what are the things that you're looking for when you're hiring for this field?
Yeah. So we usually ask some subject specific questions, things like some Python coding questions. And we want to be able to see that people can think logically. So I might kind of present a toy problem of the sort that I deal with in my daily work and ask them to think through it, kind of out loud for me. Um, and I mean, I guess on someone's resume, I'm looking for someone who's um, either got a degree in bioinformatics or actually just something related. It's not uncommon for people to come in from statistics, physics, computer science into doing this work. Um, but yeah, a lot of it, I would say for me, a lot of it really is based on the interview and do I feel like people can think logically? Are they people I'd enjoy working with? Are they respectful to all of my colleagues, regardless of race and gender. Often we have group interviews. And so I know I worked with a really sweet older man who started at Agilent the year I was born, and he would make sure that people were paying as much attention to me as a younger female colleague before we hired them. So I really appreciated that.
Right, right,
So yeah, I guess a combo of technical and social skills.
right. And I think that's good for students to hear that just because you went to a school doesn't mean you learned what you needed to learn to do the job that needs to be done. That ultimately, wherever you go, you need to be able to do the job and have the skills, and that's the most important thing.
For sure. Yeah. And even we've definitely interviewed people who've done things like take online courses in coding and things like that. And I have to admit I do approach that with a little more skepticism than someone who has a full degree. Um, but if they're able to answer the questions, then that does kind of assuage my concerns, right? I'm like,
Right,
they got the skills. So
right, right. Looking at your educational record, two degrees at Case Western, the PhD at Cornell. Obviously, you worked very hard and had some very high goals for yourself. What advice do you have for those students who would like to, you know, earn multiple degrees and get that PhD or masters or whatever it might be? What advice do you have for them to make that happen?
so thinking about students who are already pretty academically gifted, something that was challenging for me about a PhD is that you become a lot more self-directed. And so in high school and undergrad, there are very clear objectives to meet. And so I would say if you're someone who's considering a PhD, that's kind of something to keep in mind. Do you feel like you can be a little bit more self-directed? Um, and honestly, it's a lot of work. I would say that was definitely where school became really challenging for me. Um, and so honestly, I wouldn't spend 5 years of my life on it unless you have a career in mind where you need one.
Mhm.
A master's, I think it's typically a lot more still classroom based and feels a lot more like a continuation of undergrad. So to me, it's fewer years and I wouldn't say that it's easier, but it's not it's not the qualitative change of experience. Like a PhD feels like a completely new thing, and I don't think a master's does as much. Um, yeah, I mean, doing things that you care about, I think is, because being self-directed is really important. So like if it's something that you care enough to go read about on your own time, then I think you're more likely to stick it out through a graduate degree on
Right.
that subject. And again, just yeah, if you can find people who've done things before you to chat with, I've also found that really helpful. Like at Case, I was an engineer in an engineering sorority, and it meant that I knew most of the very few other women in my higher level computer science classes, and that I had kind of access to a lot of mentors who could help me with, if I got stuck in my homework or whatever. So, um, yeah, I don't think of myself as a super outgoing or social person, but as we're speaking, I'm really thinking about how much the social connections as well as the obvious of trying to do well academically have been important for me.
Good. You mentioned earlier about working in a lab at Case Western. You also worked in labs at Iowa State, Cornell. Some people that really have done a lot of impressive work with AI and the medical and biology fields. How have those experiences impacted your career journey?
Actually, that makes me think of something else I should mention to younger folks is that I did do a National Science Foundation research experience for undergraduates while I was at Case, where I went and worked for a summer at Iowa State with Dr. Vasant Hanavar, and he is someone who has a machine learning lab, and so and does um, he works on biology data, so things like maybe trying to classify is this cell a tumor or not, right? So machine learning applications in biology, and that that really is what made me feel certain that this is what I wanted to do. Was that experience. Um, a PhD is hard, but you are also basically being paid to think, to think about an interesting problem, which is super cool that someone will that someone will pay you to do that. And even this research experience for undergraduates is funded, so I think something else worth saying is that if you're in the sciences, um, you should probably be being paid for grad school. I would not go somewhere that didn't pay you for graduate school. Um, and someplace like Cornell that where the students have threatened to unionize and gotten good
Oh,
salaries, I highly recommend. Um, but yeah, I mean, so that experience in undergrad was really formative. Um, it exposed me to a lot of other students from different backgrounds who are also going into computational biology. There was one woman who was doing computer science stats and biochemistry, maybe. They're just some really impressive people. So it was really cool to get to know other people who were doing what I was doing. Um, and it did give me a chance to kind of experience that more self-directed, working in a research community before doing a PhD. So that was really helpful.
right, right. As at Agilent, you guys have done a lot of things. I was looking at the website and just all the instruments and software and everything else you guys have created. And obviously, I know you can't share every little thing you're working on, but is there anything that's already out there in the public that you played a role in that you're especially proud of having helped with that?
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, first I always like to talk up Agilent. They're actually an HP spinoff. And so how they got into biotech is that they started printing pieces of DNA with HP printer heads. And
Hmm.
so you like print letter by letter the sequence of DNA that you want. So it's just I find it just really cool technology to work on. And then, yeah, specifically what I work on is a customer might come to us because they want to sequence a disease-related gene. So they want to, someone's got breast cancer, they want to see if they've got a BRCA mutation so they can know what treatment to give them. And so what I do is help develop the wet lab product that lets you extract just your gene that you're interested in and sequence just that instead of the whole genome. It's mostly a cost saving thing. Like if you want to sequence every letter in someone's genome, that's expensive. If you just want to sequence BRCA1 a lot, that's a lot cheaper. So we help you pull out what you care about. And so yeah, I have worked on this blood test that's blood cancer test that's being released in New York State is one that I feel really good about. Um, I worked on a prenatal testing product for letting parents check if their unborn children are going to have particular diseases. The Singaporean military, I think, is providing that to in like a test trial to all of the parents, where one of the parents is in the military. Um, I worked with a research lab that was looking at gene editing, actually. And what we did is we helped them look at locations where they were afraid they might inadvertently be altering the genome to check if that was happening. So I would say those are my three biggest ones where there's actually been a public publication that I can send to my mom and be like, look, I worked on this, you know?
It was good that you made me apply to all those schools.
That's right, that's right.
A lot of really good things that you're doing, but obviously any career has its challenges. Are there any certain challenges that a student would need to be aware of before heading down this path to becoming a computational biologist?
Um, So I would say what I do is sometimes more interesting conceptually than it is on a day-to-day basis. Like what I do is very interesting to me to talk about. I love this. Some days I'm basically sitting around and manipulating text files in Python. Like that's the practical implementation of the job. And so, I do think you need to know that you are someone who's willing to sit at a computer and code a lot.
Right.
Um, I also think the decision to go into academia or industry is a really big one. I went to school thinking I wanted to be a professor. That's why I got my PhD. And I found that Cornell requires that all of their graduate students get teaching experience. And I found that when I was trying to both teach and do research, I didn't feel like I could do either of those things to the best of my ability. Like I couldn't give all of my time to doing them really well.
Right.
Um, and that was a big part of why I decided to go into industry and be able to just focus on the research and doing it really well. Um, and then I've gotten in my teaching enjoyment through volunteer experiences and things like that.
Yeah.
Um, the downside to industry is that I also really like basic research, trying to figure out how the world works. And we do less of that, the goal is to produce a practical product that's going to be out in the world, which is cool. I see an impact of my work in, less than a decade or two, like I might in academia, but sometimes I miss the basic, I really want to understand how this works instead of understanding it just well enough to make it work.
Right. 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 And again, that idea of experience that helped you figure out, okay, I do like teaching, and you found a way to continue doing that, but yet you realized I probably don't want to do that as my full-time position. So again, I can't encourage students enough to go out and get experiences, because that's where they will figure out really where they want to go. You mentioned earlier like bioinformatics and so forth. Are there other careers that are maybe related to yours that, again, maybe we could expose students to just briefly, so that they're not like you and when you left high school you had no idea about your position? Maybe give them some other options if um, computational biologist isn't quite what they want to do, but maybe there's some other things that are related.
Yeah, so I work with a lot of folks who are on the wet lab side. So they actually sit at a bench and, do biology, pipette liquids around, run a sequencer. So if you're someone who's a little more hands-on, so you're interested in this conceptually, but you don't want to sit around and manipulate text files all day, that's something that's a lot more hands-on. And I would say honestly requires a manual dexterity that I do not have, but that's that's definitely, it's other people's thing. Um, there are people who I was actually the lab I was in at Cornell was a plant pathology lab. And so they also have an extension program where people actually go out and give farmers practical advice on, do we think that you should spray with this herbicide this year? Here's how to deal with it if you have this pathogen. So that's another more practical, you can get out and do field work as either with plants or certainly actually I've been looking at these servicifications you can do where you go out and help scientists band owls and things like that, right? Because it does to me sound a lot of fun to actually get out in the field. And so that's something people could move toward. I know a professor whose research is on teaching. So if you're someone who kind of feels like I did, which is that you really like teaching, but you want to focus in on one thing. That was really interesting to me that he could kind of merge the research with the teaching so that he could focus on one thing and do it really well. Um, and I guess the only other thing that comes to mind is there are bioinformatics folks who work in hospitals. And so for me, that feels a little bit high pressure. You're helping to interpret variants and actually recommend treatments for patients. I think it would be very rewarding, and that you'd be very directly impacting people's care. But I also think it would be very stressful because mistakes would matter a lot more. And so that's just not, I think, the sort of environment I want to work in. But again, I'm sure it's for some people.
Right. If you were going to give advice to someone who is going into the computational biology field, would you suggest that they follow the path that you followed? Are there other options? I guess what advice would you give?
So I actually, honestly, I don't know if there are now undergraduate degrees specifically in bioinformatics, but that would be a thing to check for. I started grad school at Iowa State, and they're one of the oldest graduate programs in bioinformatics, so they wouldn't be a bad place to look and see if that's spilled over to an undergrad degree. Um, but I do kind of like that I did both degrees, at least for me at Case, that was possible with 15 or 18 credits a semester. It wasn't, 18 was a busy semester, but it wasn't overall overwhelming.
Right.
Um, they share, a lot of the gen ed requirements and things like that. So I think that's not a bad path to try and do both. I definitely feel really lucky that I got research experience as an undergrad. Um, So that's something that I enjoyed. And like you said, with experience being really important, I do feel like as an adult, a lot of times you look at job positions and they're like, we will hire you for this job if you have experience doing this job. And it feels like a bit of a catch-22, right? I can't get this job because I don't have experience doing this job. And so I feel like internships and things like that in an undergrad are a really they're where you can break into that cycle, right? Is that you can get an internship without experience, and now you have that experience to offer on a resume.
Right. As we wrap up and you look back at your education, career, so forth, what do you know now about careers that you wish you had known when you were in high school?
My biggest thing is that I felt like what I did in undergrad, and especially as I was picking a PhD project, was going to dictate what I did for the rest of my life. It just felt really high pressure. Um, and something that I've observed in my job is a lot of people who have made these sideways steps that are really interesting. Like one of the smartest bioinformatics people I know, his training is in physics, you know, um, and he got into this because he's good at coming up with algorithms to solve difficult problems. He's good at stats. There are these physics skills that apply to what I'm doing. So he's doing something very different than what his undergrad degree was in. Or even for me, my graduate lab was in plant pathology, and now I work almost exclusively with human data. And so I think it helps to take a little bit of that pressure off of yourself to feel like, and I think this can apply at the undergrad level too, that what you're doing now it's not what you have to do forever.
Right.
You can leverage those skills to get into different things. And so you can maybe take a little bit of the pressure off of yourself to pick the perfect thing.
Right. And I do know that a lot of people put that pressure on themselves, but like you said, you will be able to move one way or the other if needed. And again, the experiences will hopefully help people figure that out. So, Katie, I really appreciate it. Sounds like you are doing some amazing work, and glad I don't have to do Punnett squares anymore. And so I appreciate it. I hope some students will reach out to you if they have questions, and I hope that you have good luck on the remainder of your career journey. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
If you liked this Joust About Careers episode, you can explore previous episodes and highlights to learn about even more careers of Van Buren graduates. To be sure you don't miss upcoming episodes, please click subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform so you'll know when the next episode is released. Thank you for spending a portion of your day with us, and we hope you will continue to prepare for your future by learning just about careers.